The lighthouse keeper's daughter vanished on a Tuesday morning in August 1998, somewhere between the time her father checked the beacon at dawn and the moment her mother screamed from the rocky shore below. For 26 years, everyone believed little Ivy June Mackenzie had simply fallen into the frigid waters of Resurrection Bay, another tragic victim of Alaska's unforgiving coastline. The search boats found nothing. The divers found nothing. Even the tides, which always returned something eventually, gave back nothing at all. But in October 2024, a woman in British Columbia submitted her DNA to a genealogy website, hoping to find her birth parents. What she found instead was a name she'd never heard before, a lighthouse she'd never seen, and parents who'd spent a quarter-century believing their baby had drowned in the sea. Sometimes the dead come back, and when they do, they bring questions no one wants to answer. If you value stories of persistence, truth, and the complexity of human nature, please subscribe to Greg's Cold Files. We dig deep into the cases that refuse to stay buried. Part 1. August 18th, 1998. Location: Caines Head Lighthouse, Resurrection Bay, Alaska. The light never slept. Every 12 seconds, the Fresnel lens rotated with mechanical precision, casting its warning beam across the dark waters of Resurrection Bay. Thomas Mackenzie had maintained that rhythm for 7 years, long enough to sync his heartbeat to it, long enough to forget what silence sounded like. The lighthouse sat on a rocky promontory at the southern tip of Caines Head, accessible only by boat or a treacherous 5-mile hike along the coastal trail. It was a posting few requested and fewer still completed. Thomas had volunteered. "Solitude suits me," he'd told the Coast Guard recruiter back in 1991, "and my wife needs the quiet." Rachel Mackenzie needed more than quiet. She needed distance from the mainland, from the pitying looks in Seward's grocery stores, from the well-meaning neighbors who kept suggesting adoption agencies and fertility specialists. After 8 years of trying, 4 miscarriages, and 1 stillbirth that nearly killed her, Rachel had accepted the truth that her body refused to give her what she wanted most: a child. Then, in the winter of 1996, something miraculous happened. She got pregnant, and this time, impossibly, she stayed pregnant. Ivy June Mackenzie was born on June 14, 1996, at Providence Seward Medical Center, weighing 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She had her mother's dark curls and her father's slate-blue eyes. Rachel held her daughter and wept until the nurses grew concerned. Thomas stood by the window, watching the mountains across Resurrection Bay, unable to speak for the weight of gratitude pressing on his chest. They named her after the wild ivy that clung to the cliffs near the lighthouse, stubborn, resilient, beautiful in its refusal to let go. For 2 years, the lighthouse was no longer just a beacon. It was a home. Rachel sang to Ivy every morning while making coffee, her voice carrying through the narrow kitchen and up the spiral staircase. Thomas taught his daughter to recognize the foghorn's call, holding her on his hip while pointing toward the gray horizon. "That's Bear Glacier," he'd say, "and that's where the sea lions come in April." Ivy babbled back in sounds that almost resembled words. She was small for her age, but alert, always watching, always listening. By 18 months, she could climb the first 3 steps of the lighthouse stairs by herself. By 2, she'd learned to mimic the rhythm of the light's rotation, spinning in circles on the wooden floor, until she collapsed in giggles. Thomas documented everything. He kept a journal in the cramped office beside the lamp room, noting weather patterns, ship sightings, maintenance tasks, and, since Ivy's birth, small milestones. June 14, 1997, Ivy's first birthday. Made a cake with canned frosting. She ate more of the wrapper than the cake. November 3, 1997, first snowfall. Ivy saw snow for the first time. She cried until Rachel brought her inside. April 22nd, 1998. Ivy said, "Daddy," clearly today. Rachel cried. It was the kind of life people romanticized from a distance, but struggled to sustain up close. The isolation wore on Rachel more than she admitted. Some weeks, they didn't see another human being. Supplies came by boat every 2 weeks, delivered by a gruff fisherman named Carl Rennick, who rarely stayed longer than it took to unload the crates. Mail was sporadic. The radio phone worked when the weather cooperated. Still, Rachel told herself it was enough. She had Ivy, she had Thomas, she had the light. On the morning of August 18th, 1998, Thomas woke at 5:47 a.m., 7 minutes before his alarm. Habit. He dressed in the dark, careful not to wake Rachel, and climbed the 73 steps to the lamp room. The beacon was still rotating smoothly. The logbook sat open on the metal desk, its pages warped from humidity. He wrote, August 18th, 1998, 0550 hours, clear skies, visibility 12+ miles, beacon operational, wind NE 8 knots. Below him, the bay stretched out in shades of gray and silver, the mountains beyond still dark against the pre-dawn sky. A fishing trawler moved slowly toward Seward, its running lights blinking. Thomas watched it for a moment, then descended the stairs. Rachel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. Ivy sat in her wooden high chair, banging a plastic spoon against the tray. "Morning," Thomas said, kissing the top of Rachel's head. "She's been up since 5, Rachel replied, her voice flat with exhaustion. Thomas lifted Ivy from the chair. "Hey, little light, you giving Mama trouble?" Ivy grinned and grabbed his beard. He winced, but didn't pull away. "I'm taking her outside for a bit," Rachel said. "She needs air, and I need coffee I can actually drink while it's hot." Thomas nodded. "Stay close to the house." "Always do." That was the last conversation they would have before everything changed. Rachel dressed Ivy in a fleece jacket and rubber boots 2 sizes too big. She tied a wool hat under the child's chin and carried her down the gravel path toward the rocky outcrop where they liked to watch the seals. The air smelled of salt and diesel and something faintly sweet. Wild roses, maybe, clinging to the hillside above the lighthouse. Ivy pointed toward the water. "Bah! Boat," Rachel corrected gently. "That's a boat." "Bah!" Rachel smiled. It was the little things that kept her sane. Ivy's mispronunciations, the way she clapped when the seagulls cried, the weight of her small body against Rachel's chest when she fell asleep. She set Ivy down on a flat rock and crouched beside her, scanning the bay for movement. There. 3 harbor seals, sleek and dark, surfacing near the kelp beds. "Look, Ivy, seals." Ivy stared, transfixed. Rachel turned to pick up a smooth stone for Ivy to hold, something to keep her hands busy, and when she looked back, her daughter was gone. Not slowly, not gradually, just gone. The rock where Ivy had been sitting was empty. The gravel path behind them was empty. The water below, still and gray, showed no ripples, no disturbance, no sign that anything had broken its surface. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "Ivy?" Her voice was calm at first, reasonable. Children wandered, children hid. "Ivy, honey, where are you?" She stood, scanning the rocks, the tide pools, the narrow strip of beach below. Nothing. "Ivy!" Louder now, sharper. She began moving, first walking, then jogging, then running back toward the lighthouse, her boots slipping on loose stones. "Thomas! Thomas!" He appeared in the doorway, wiping oil from his hands with a rag. "What's wrong?" "She's gone. I turned around for 2 seconds and she's gone." Thomas didn't ask questions. He dropped the rag and ran past her, toward the rocks, calling Ivy's name. Rachel followed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. They searched for an hour before calling the Coast Guard. By noon, a helicopter was circling overhead, its rotors drowning out the sound of the waves. By 2 p.m., a dive team had arrived from Seward, along with a dozen volunteers and 2 park rangers. By evening, the search area had expanded to cover 3 miles of coastline. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no footprints leading into the water, no sign of a struggle. It was as if Ivy June Mackenzie had simply ceased to exist. August 19th, 1998. Location: Seward Harbor Master's Office, Seward, Alaska. Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Dale Moreno had worked missing persons cases before, but never one like this. Children didn't vanish from lighthouses. Statistically, they drowned, they fell, they wandered off and got lost. But they left traces, clothing, footprints, something. Ivy Mackenzie had left nothing. Moreno sat across from Thomas and Rachel in a cramped office that smelled of fish and coffee. Rachel's eyes were red and swollen. Thomas stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Neither had slept. "Walk me through it again," Moreno said gently. Rachel's voice was hoarse. "I put her down on the rock. I turned to pick up a stone. When I looked back, she was gone." "How long were you turned away?" 3 seconds, maybe 5. Not long. "And you didn't hear anything? A splash? A cry?" "Nothing." Moreno wrote in his notebook, though he'd already taken this statement twice. "Mr. Mackenzie, you were inside the lighthouse?" Thomas nodded. "Working on the generator. It's loud. I wouldn't have heard anything." "Did either of you notice any boats in the area that morning? Anyone unusual?" Rachel shook her head. "Just the fishing boats. Same as always." "What about visitors? Anyone who knew you had a daughter?" Thomas looked up. "We don't get visitors. The only people who come out there are supply deliveries and Coast Guard inspections." Moreno tapped his pen against the notebook. "What about Carl Rennick? When was the last time he delivered supplies?" "August 12th, Thomas said. 6 days before." "And he seemed normal?" "Carl's always normal. Drops off the crates, smokes a cigarette, leaves." Moreno made a note to interview Rennick anyway. Over the next 3 days, the search intensified. Cadaver dogs were brought in and found no scent. Divers explored the underwater rocks and crevices around the lighthouse. Nothing. The Coast Guard reviewed tide charts and current patterns, calculating where a small body might have drifted if it had entered the water. The results were grim, but inconclusive. "If she went into the water here," the lead diver explained, pointing to a map, "the current would have carried her south toward Ayalik Bay. But we've had favorable conditions for recovery. If she drowned, we should have found something by now." That left 2 possibilities. Either Ivy's body was trapped somewhere underwater, wedged into a crevice too deep or narrow for divers to reach, or she hadn't drowned at all. By August 25th, the official search was scaled back. The helicopter returned to its base. The divers packed their gear. The volunteers stopped showing up. Rachel refused to leave the lighthouse. "She's out there," she told Thomas one night, standing at the window, staring into the blackness beyond the light's reach. "I can feel it. She's waiting for us to find her." Thomas didn't argue. What could he say? That he'd already accepted the unacceptable? That every time he climbed those stairs to check the beacon, he imagined his daughter's small body floating face down in the kelp beds? He kept those thoughts to himself and held his wife while she wept. September 1998. December 1998. Location: Seward and surrounding areas. The investigation stalled almost immediately. Sergeant Moreno interviewed Carl Rennick 3 times. The fisherman's alibi was solid. He'd been in Homer on August 18th, delivering king crab to a processing plant. Receipts, timestamps, and multiple witnesses confirmed it. Moreno expanded the search to include registered sex offenders within a 100-mile radius of Seward. There were 4. 2 were incarcerated at the time of Ivy's disappearance. The other 2 had alibis and no connection to the Mackenzie family. He reviewed boat traffic logs from the harbormaster's office. On August 18th, 17 vessels had passed through Resurrection Bay between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. 14 were commercial fishing boats with documented routes. 2 were private sailboats belonging to local retirees. 1 was a Canadian research vessel en route to Homer. Moreno requested passenger manifests and crew lists for all 17. The Canadian vessel, a marine biology research boat called the Nereid, had a crew of 4: Dr. Elliot Carver, lead researcher, Dr. Marion Holt, marine biologist, and 2 graduate students, Nathan Yao and Jennifer Prewitt. All 4 had been aboard during the time frame in question, conducting plankton sampling in the Outer Bay. Moreno noted their names, but found no red flags, no criminal records, no history with Child Protective Services, no reason to suspect them. The case went cold by December. Not officially, Moreno kept the file open, kept adding notes, kept following up on tips that went nowhere, but the momentum was gone. The media stopped calling. The reward fund, established by a local church, grew to $8,000 and then plateaued. Thomas and Rachel stopped giving interviews. They stopped attending the prayer vigils in Seward. They withdrew into the lighthouse like wounded animals retreating to a den. In January 1999, Thomas requested a transfer. The Coast Guard approved it, citing personal hardship. By March, the Mackenzies had moved to Anchorage, where Rachel could be closer to her sister and where the ocean wasn't a constant reminder of what they'd lost. They never spoke Ivy's name aloud again. January 2003. Location: Anchorage, Alaska. Rachel Mackenzie died on January 14, 2003, at the age of 41. The official cause of death was listed as accidental overdose, a combination of sleeping pills and alcohol. The unofficial truth, the one Thomas carried alone, was that his wife had been dying in slow motion since the day Ivy vanished. She'd stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping, stopped pretending that life had meaning. Thomas found her in their bedroom, still dressed in the same clothes she'd worn to the grocery store the day before. A bottle of Ambien sat empty on the nightstand. A half-empty bottle of vodka sat beside it. He didn't call 911 right away. He sat on the edge of the bed and held her cold hand and wondered if he had the courage to follow her. In the end, he didn't. At Rachel's funeral, attended by fewer than a dozen people, her sister Diane delivered a brief eulogy. She didn't mention Ivy directly, but everyone understood what she meant when she said, "Rachel never stopped looking. Even when the rest of us had moved on, she never stopped." After the service, Thomas sold the house in Anchorage and moved to a cabin outside Fairbanks. He took a job as a maintenance supervisor at a regional airport. He stopped attending church. He stopped calling old friends. He stopped doing anything that required him to explain who he was or what he'd lost. The years passed in silence. 2003 became 2005. 2005 became 2010. The world kept turning, kept moving, kept forgetting. But in a small apartment in Kamloops, British Columbia, a little girl named Clara Holt was growing up without any idea that her entire life was built on a lie. September 15, 2024. Location: Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada. Clara Holt had always known she was adopted. Her parents, Elliot and Marion Holt, never tried to hide it. They'd told her the story 100 times, always the same way. Marion couldn't have children, so they'd gone through a private adoption agency, and Clara had been the answer to their prayers. "We chose you," Marion would say, brushing Clara's dark curls away from her face. "Out of all the babies in the world, We chose you. It was a comforting story, a loving story. It was also, Clara would soon discover, a lie. At 26 years old, Clara was a pediatric nurse at Royal Inland Hospital in Kamloops. She lived in a modest apartment near the Thompson River and spent her weekends hiking, reading, and, lately, obsessing over her genetic ancestry. It started innocuously enough. A co-worker had done one of those DNA tests and discovered she had a half-sister she'd never known about. "You should try it," the co-worker said. "You might find your birth parents." Clara wasn't sure she wanted to. Her relationship with Elliot and Marion was good, maybe not warm, exactly, but functional. Her father was a retired marine biologist, methodical and distant. Her mother was a librarian, quiet and careful. They'd given Clara a stable childhood, paid for her nursing school, and supported her career. Still, there was always a question mark, a blank space where her origin story should be. On September 10th, 2024, Clara ordered an Ancestry DNA kit online. On September 15th, she received her results. The genetic breakdown was unsurprising. 47% Scandinavian, 31% British Isles, 18% Eastern European, 4% undetermined. What was surprising were the DNA matches. The website listed 3 close relatives, 1 second cousin, 1 first cousin, and 1 half-sibling. Clara stared at the screen. Half-sibling? She clicked on the profile. The account belonged to someone named D. Mackenzie Fairbanks, A.K. No photo, no additional information. But the genetic link was undeniable. They shared approximately 25% of their DNA, consistent with a half-sibling relationship. Clara's hands shook as she typed a message. "Hi. I just got my DNA results, and it looks like we might be related. I was adopted in 1998 and have been trying to learn more about my birth family. If you're comfortable sharing any information, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, Clara." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. 3 days later, she received a reply. "Clara, my name is Diane Peterson. I'm not your half-sibling, I'm your aunt. My sister Rachel was your mother. She died in 2003. I need you to call me as soon as you can. This is important." The message included a phone number. Clara called immediately. Diane answered on the first ring. Her voice was older, careful, thick with an emotion Clara couldn't identify. "Clara?" "Yes, I got your message. I don't understand." "Are you sitting down?" Clara sat on the edge of her couch, her heart pounding. "Yes." "Your real name," Diane said slowly, "is Ivy June Mackenzie. You were born on June 14th, 1996, in Seward, Alaska. You disappeared on August 18th, 1998. Everyone thought you were dead." Clara's vision blurred. "That's not possible. I was adopted through an agency." "What agency?" I don't know. My parents never told me the name." "Clara, listen to me. I need you to ask your parents where you came from. Ask them who arranged the adoption. Ask them if they were ever in Alaska." "Why would they lie?" "I don't know," Diane said. "But your mother, your biological mother, spent 5 years searching for you. It destroyed her. And your father, Thomas, he's still alive. He lives in Fairbanks. He deserves to know you're alive." Clara hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Then she stood, grabbed her keys, and drove to her parents' house. September 16th, 2024. Location: Holt Residence, Kamloops, British Columbia. Marion Holt was in the garden when Clara arrived, trimming the roses that grew along the back fence. She looked up, startled, when Clara pushed through the gate without knocking. "Clara? What's wrong?" "We need to talk." Marion set down the pruning shears, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "About what?" "About who I really am." Marion's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Clara pulled out her phone and showed Marion the DNA results. I took a test. I found my biological family. My real name is Ivy Mackenzie. I was reported missing in 1998 from Alaska. Marion swayed slightly. She reached for the fence to steady herself. Where's Dad? Clara demanded. He's not home. Then you're going to tell me. Right now. What did you do? Marion sank onto the garden bench, her hands trembling. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet Clara had to lean closer to hear, she said, We didn't mean for it to happen this way. What way? We were in Alaska in August 1998. Your father was doing research on marine plankton populations in Resurrection Bay. We'd been trying to have a baby for years. I'd had 3 miscarriages. The doctors said I'd never carry to term. Clara's chest tightened. Go on. We were anchored near Caines Head. Your father was below deck, working on samples. I was on the bow, taking photographs of the coastline. That's when I saw you. Saw me where? On the rocks. You were sitting there, all alone, in this little fleece jacket and oversized boots. You couldn't have been more than 2 years old. I watched for 10 minutes, maybe longer. No one came for you. You started crawling toward the edge, toward the water. Clara felt sick. So you took me. I got in the dinghy and rowed over. I told myself I was rescuing you, that you'd fallen or wandered away from your parents. But when I picked you up, you didn't cry. You just looked at me. And I thought... Marion's voice broke. I thought maybe God had sent you to me. You kidnapped me. We crossed into Canadian waters that afternoon. Your father didn't ask questions. He knew what I'd done, but he didn't stop me. We docked in Prince Rupert and drove to Kamloops. We told everyone you were from a private adoption. Did you even try to find out who I was? Did you check if anyone was looking for me? Marion looked away. We saw the news reports. We knew. Clara stood abruptly, her hands balled into fists. You stole me. You let my family think I was dead. You let my mother... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Marion whispered. Sorry doesn't bring her back. She's dead because of you. Marion began to cry, but Clara didn't stay to watch. She walked back to her car, got in, and drove until her hands stopped shaking. Then she called the number Diane had given her and asked for Sergeant Dale Moreno's contact information. September 19th, 2024. Location, Alaska State Troopers, Cold Case Unit, Anchorage, Alaska. Sergeant Dale Moreno was 71 years old and officially retired, but he still kept an office in the Cold Case Unit, partly out of habit, partly because there were cases he couldn't let go of. Ivy Mackenzie was one of them. When his desk phone rang at 9:42 a.m. on September 19th, he answered without looking at the caller ID. Moreno. Sergeant Moreno? My name is Clara Holt. I think I'm Ivy Mackenzie. Moreno sat very still. I took a DNA test, Clara continued, her voice shaking. I found my aunt. She told me about my biological parents. I confronted the people who raised me. They admitted they took me from Alaska in 1998. Where are you right now? Moreno asked. Kamloops, British Columbia. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone else until I call you back. Can you do that? Yes. Moreno hung up and immediately dialed the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment in Kamloops. Within 6 hours, Elliot and Marion Holt were arrested on charges of kidnapping, child abduction, and fraud. Marion confessed almost immediately. Elliot remained silent, invoking his right to an attorney. The Canadian authorities coordinated with Alaska State Troopers to arrange Clara's return to the United States for DNA confirmation and witness interviews. On September 23, 2024, Clara flew to Anchorage and provided a saliva sample for testing. On September 25th, the results came back, a definitive match to Thomas Mackenzie's DNA. Ivy June Mackenzie was alive. Part 2. September 28th, 2024. Location: Fairbanks, Alaska. Thomas Mackenzie was 73 years old and had learned to live with ghosts. He lived in a one-bedroom cabin 12 miles outside Fairbanks, far enough from town that he could go weeks without seeing another person. The cabin sat on 3 acres of birch and spruce, with a view of the Tanana River Valley and nothing else. No neighbors, no noise, just the wind through the trees and the occasional moose wandering past his porch. He'd retired from the airport 5 years earlier and spent his days reading, chopping firewood, and maintaining a solitude so complete it had become its own kind of religion. He didn't own a television. His phone was a landline that rarely rang. His mailbox, half a mile down the gravel road, filled mostly with circulars and past due notices for subscriptions he'd forgotten to cancel. He thought about Rachel every day. He thought about Ivy every hour. On the morning of September 28th, he was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard a vehicle coming up the drive. The sound was unusual enough that he stopped mid-swing, the axe frozen above his shoulder. A white SUV with Alaska State Trooper markings rolled to a stop near the porch. Thomas set down the axe and walked slowly toward the vehicle, wiping his hands on his jeans. The driver's door opened, and a man in his 70s stepped out, tall, gray-haired, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose knees no longer cooperated. "Thomas Mackenzie?" the man asked. "That's me." The trooper extended his hand. "Dale Moreno. We spoke back in 1998. Thomas studied the man's face and found something familiar in the set of his jaw, the tired eyes. "I remember. Can we talk inside?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Coffee?" "Please." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A wood stove, a worn couch, bookshelves lined with paperbacks and maritime histories. Thomas poured 2 mugs of coffee from a percolator on the stove and handed one to Moreno. "What's this about?" Thomas asked, though part of him already knew. People didn't drive 12 miles into the woods to deliver good news. Moreno sat on the couch and set his mug on the coffee table. "I need you to sit down for this." Thomas remained standing. "Just say it. Your daughter is alive." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas didn't move, didn't blink. For a moment Moreno wondered if he'd heard. Then Thomas's legs buckled, and he sat heavily in the wooden chair by the stove. "That's not possible," Thomas whispered. "She was taken in 1998 by a couple from British Columbia. They were doing research in Resurrection Bay. The woman took Ivy from the rocks while you and Rachel were searching. They crossed into Canadian waters and raised her as their own." Thomas stared at the floor. His hands were shaking. "How do you know?" "She took a DNA test, found her aunt, Rachel's sister Diane. The results matched your DNA from the original investigation. We arrested the couple who took her. They've both confessed." "Where is she?" "Anchorage. She's been staying with Diane while we sort out the legal details." Thomas looked up, his eyes wet. "Does she know about Rachel?" "Yes." "Does she want to see me?" Moreno nodded. "That's why I'm here. She asked if I'd bring you to her." Thomas stood slowly, like a man waking from a long sleep. "Give me 10 minutes." He disappeared into the bedroom and returned wearing a clean flannel shirt and a jacket that smelled faintly of mothballs. His hands were still shaking as he locked the cabin door and climbed into the passenger seat of Moreno's SUV. They drove in silence for the first 20 minutes. Finally, Thomas spoke. "What's her name now?" "Clara. Clara Holt. She's a nurse, lives in Kamloops." "Is she—" Thomas paused, searching for the right word. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, I think she's trying to figure out who she is. Thomas nodded. He understood that feeling better than anyone. They told her she was adopted, Moreno continued. She didn't know the truth until the DNA test. From what I understand, they treated her well. No abuse, no neglect, just a lie that lasted 26 years. Rachel would have wanted to know that, Thomas said quietly, that she was safe. Moreno glanced at him. I'm sorry we didn't find her sooner. You did your job. It wasn't your fault. They drove the rest of the way without speaking. September 28th, 2024. Location, Diane Peterson's home, Anchorage, Alaska. Clara had been living in her aunt's guest room for 5 days, and in that time she'd cried more than she had in the previous 26 years combined. Diane was kind, patient, careful not to push too hard. She'd shown Clara photographs, Rachel and Thomas on their wedding day, Rachel pregnant with Ivy, Ivy's first birthday. Clara stared at the images like archaeological artifacts, trying to reconcile the smiling toddler with the person she'd become. You look like her, Diane said one evening, pointing to a photo of Rachel holding Ivy on the porch of the lighthouse. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Clara touched the photograph. I don't remember any of this. You were 2. Most people don't remember that age. Do you think she would have forgiven them? Clara asked. Marion and Elliot? Diane was quiet for a long moment. No, but I think she would have understood why they did it. Desperation makes people do terrible things. I don't know how to feel about them, Clara admitted. They lied to me my entire life, but they also raised me. They paid for my education. They were there when I graduated nursing school. You're allowed to feel more than one thing at once, Diane said gently. Now, sitting in Diane's living room, waiting for Thomas to arrive, Clara felt like she might vibrate out of her skin. She'd changed clothes 3 times. She'd rehearsed what she might say, and discarded every version. What do you say to a father who thought you were dead for 26 years? When the doorbell rang, Clara stood so quickly she knocked over her water glass. Diane answered the door. Thomas Mackenzie stood on the porch, backlit by the late afternoon sun, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. He was tall, thin, his hair more gray than Clara had expected. His face was weathered, lined with decades of solitude and grief. He looked at her, and his expression crumbled. Ivy, he whispered. Clara's throat tightened. It's Clara now. Right, sorry. Clara. They stood there, 10 feet apart, neither knowing how to bridge the distance. Diane stepped forward. I'll give you 2 some privacy. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. She disappeared down the hallway, leaving them alone. Thomas took a hesitant step forward. Can I hug you? Clara nodded, and he crossed the room in 3 strides, wrapping his arms around her with a desperation that made her chest ache. He smelled like wood smoke and old flannel. He was shaking. I thought I'd lost you forever, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't find you. Clara hugged him back, her face pressed against his shoulder, and for the first time since this all began, she felt something click into place. Not wholeness, not yet, but a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You grew up beautiful. Your mother would be so proud. Diane told me what happened to her, Clara said quietly. I'm sorry. She never stopped looking. Even when everyone else gave up, she kept searching. It killed her in the end. They sat on the couch, a careful distance between them. Tell me about her, Clara said. I want to know who she was. So Thomas told her. He told her about Rachel's love of singing, the way she'd hum while cooking breakfast. He told her about the miscarriages, the stillbirth, the years of grief that made Ivy's birth feel like a miracle. He told her about the lighthouse, the isolation, the way Rachel would watch the seals with Ivy every morning. She documented everything, Thomas said. She kept a journal. I still have it. If you want, I can send it to you. I'd like that. They talked for hours about Clara's childhood in Kamloops, her nursing career, the strange dissonance of discovering her entire identity was built on a lie. Thomas listened without judgment, without trying to offer solutions he didn't have. At one point, Clara asked, "Do you hate them, Marion and Elliot?" Thomas considered the question. "I did at first. When Moreno told me what they'd done, I wanted to drive to Canada and—" He stopped. "But then I thought about what Rachel would say, and I think she'd say that hating them won't bring back the years we lost. It won't undo the pain. It'll just make more of it." "So you forgive them?" "I didn't say that. I said I'm trying not to hate them. Forgiveness might take longer." Clara nodded. "I don't know if I can ever call you Dad." "I'm not asking you to. Thomas's is fine. But I'd like to keep getting to know you." "If that's okay." "I'd like that too." Before Thomas left that evening, he pulled a small photograph from his wallet, faded, creased, barely held together by yellowed tape. It showed a toddler with dark curls sitting on a rock, grinning at the camera. "I've carried this every day since you disappeared," he said, handing it to Clara. "I know you don't remember being her, but this is who you were, and whoever you are now, she's still part of you." Clara stared at the photograph, at the little girl she'd once been, and felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. October 15th, 2024. Location: Anchorage Courthouse, Anchorage, Alaska. The extradition hearing for Elliot and Marion Holt was held on a gray Tuesday morning in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and floor polish. Clara sat in the back row, flanked by Diane on one side and Thomas on the other. She hadn't spoken to Marion or Elliot since their arrest. She wasn't sure she could. The Holts were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in plain clothes, their faces drawn and pale. Marion's eyes found Clara immediately. She mouthed something, "I'm sorry, maybe," or "I love you," but Clara looked away. The Crown prosecutor from British Columbia made the case for extradition. The crimes had occurred in Alaska on American soil. The victim was an American citizen. Justice demanded the Holts face trial in the jurisdiction where the offense took place. The defense attorney argued that the Holts were Canadian citizens with no prior criminal record, that they'd raised Clara in a loving home, that extradition was excessive given the circumstances. The judge listened to both sides, then delivered her ruling. The abduction of a child is not mitigated by the quality of care provided afterward. The fact remains that Ivy Mackenzie was taken from her family without consent, and her parents spent years believing she was dead. Extradition is granted. The gavel fell. Marion sobbed audibly. Elliot stared at the floor. Clara felt nothing. Or maybe she felt everything at once, and it canceled itself out into numbness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Clara kept her head down, letting Diane and Thomas shield her from the cameras. Someone shouted a question. "How does it feel to be reunited with your father?" But she didn't answer. In the parking lot, Thomas turned to her. "You don't have to go to the trial. You don't owe them anything." "I know," Clara said, "but I think I need to, for closure." Thomas nodded. "Then I'll be there with you." December 2024, March 2025. Location: Anchorage, Alaska. The trial lasted 3 months. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. DNA results, taped confessions, testimony from Sergeant Moreno, records showing the Holts had been in Resurrection Bay on the day of Ivy's disappearance, immigration documents proving they'd crossed into Canada hours after the abduction. The defense tried to paint the Holts as desperate, not malicious, two people driven by grief and infertility to make a terrible choice. They called character witnesses who testified to Marion and Elliot's devotion as parents. They showed photographs of Clara's childhood, birthday parties, graduations, family vacations. They didn't harm her, the defense attorney argued. They loved her. They stole her, the prosecution countered, and in doing so they destroyed an entire family. Clara was called to testify on the fourth week of the trial. She sat in the witness box, her hands folded in her lap, and answered questions about her childhood, her relationship with the Holts, the moment she discovered the truth. "Did they ever tell you that you were kidnapped?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Did they ever mention Alaska, the lighthouse, the Mackenzie family?" "No." "Did you have a happy childhood?" Clara hesitated. "Yes, until I found out it was built on a lie." The defense attorney cross-examined her gently. "Do you believe Marion and Elliot love you?" "I don't know what love means anymore," Clara said quietly. "I thought I did. But people who love you don't lie to you for 26 years. Marion wept silently in her seat. On March 18, 2025, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. Elliot Holt was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Marion Holt was sentenced to 15, with the possibility of parole after 10. As they were led from the courtroom, Marion turned and looked at Clara one last time. Clara met her gaze but said nothing. Outside, Thomas put his arm around Clara's shoulders. "It's over." "Is it?" Clara asked. "The trial is. The rest, healing, moving forward, that takes longer." Clara nodded. "I want to see the lighthouse." "Are you sure?" "I need to. I need to see where I came from." April 2025. Location: Caines Head, Resurrection Bay, Alaska. The hike to Caines Head Lighthouse took 4 hours. Clara, Thomas, and Diane started at the trailhead in Lowell Point, following the narrow coastal path that wound through dense forest and along rocky beaches. The trail was muddy from recent rain, and the air smelled of salt and cedar and something else, something wild and ancient. Thomas moved slowly, his knees protesting every incline, but he refused Diane's offer to turn back. "I haven't been here since we left," he said. "I need to do this too." They reached the lighthouse just after noon. It stood exactly as Clara had seen in photographs, white and weathered, perched on the rocky promontory like a sentinel. The Coast Guard had automated it years ago, so no keeper lived there now. The building was locked, but the grounds were accessible. Clara stood at the edge of the rocks where she'd been taken, staring out at the gray water. "This is where your mother sat with you every morning," Thomas said quietly, standing beside her. "She'd point out the seals and the boats and tell you stories." "I wish I remembered," Clara whispered. "Maybe it's better that you don't. The not knowing protected you in a way." They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. Finally, Clara spoke. "Do you think she's here? Mom?" Thomas looked at her. "If any place holds her spirit, it's this one." Clara knelt and picked up a smooth gray stone from the gravel path. She turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight, its coolness. "I'm sorry I don't remember you," she said, speaking to the wind, to the water, to the ghost of the mother she never knew. "But I'm here now, and I'm okay. I hope that's enough." She set the stone on the flat rock where she'd once sat as a toddler, a small marker in a place that held too many memories. Diane placed a stone beside it. Then Thomas did the same. 3 stones, 3 lives intersecting across time and grief and impossible chance. As they turned to leave, Clara looked back at the lighthouse one last time. The beacon was still rotating, still casting its light across the dark water, still warning ships away from the rocks. Some lights never go out. June 14th, 2025. Location: Fairbanks, Alaska. On Clara's 29th birthday, Thomas invited her to the cabin for dinner. She drove up from Anchorage, where she'd taken a temporary nursing position at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. She'd decided to stay in Alaska for a while, to learn the place she came from, to build a relationship with Thomas, to figure out who Ivy June Mackenzie might have become if her life hadn't been stolen. Thomas cooked salmon on the grill and baked a lopsided chocolate cake that made Clara laugh. "I'm not much of a baker," he admitted. "It's perfect," she said. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, never quite setting in the Alaskan summer, just hovering in that golden twilight that stretched for hours. Thomas handed her a wrapped package. "I've been holding on to this, waiting for the right time." Clara unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the pages yellowed and brittle. "That was your mother's," Thomas said. "She started it the day you were born. She wrote in it every day until the end." Clara opened the journal to the first page. June 14th, 1996. Ivy June Mackenzie was born today at 3:47 a.m. She is perfect. She is a miracle. I don't know what I did to deserve her, but I will spend every day of my life making sure she knows she is loved. Clara's vision blurred. She flipped through the pages, reading fragments of her mother's voice, observations about Ivy's first smile, worries about teething, joy over tiny milestones. The entries were mundane and profound all at once, a record of a mother's devotion captured in careful handwriting. The final entry was dated August 17th, 1998. "Tomorrow we're going to look for seals. Ivy loves the seals. She claps every time they surface. I wish I could freeze time, keep her this small, this perfect, forever. But I know that's not how it works. Children grow, they change, they leave. All I can do is love her while she's here and hope that's enough." Clara closed the journal and held it against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. "She loved you more than anything in this world. I need you to know that." "I do." They sat together in the golden light, father and daughter, strangers becoming family, carrying the weight of 26 lost years and the fragile hope of what might still be built. Clara didn't know if she'd ever fully reconcile the two versions of herself: Ivy, the lighthouse keeper's daughter, and Clara, the nurse from Kamloops. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she could be both. Maybe she could be something entirely new. But on that evening, on her 29th birthday, sitting beside the father she barely knew but was beginning to love, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since the day she learned the truth. She felt found. Epilogue: August 2025. Location: Seward, Alaska. The memorial was small, attended by fewer than 20 people. Clara stood at the edge of the cemetery overlooking Resurrection Bay, staring at the headstone that had been erected in 1999. It read, "Ivy June Mackenzie, born June 14, 1996, lost August 18, 1998, forever in our hearts." Beside it was a second stone placed years later. Rachel Ann Mackenzie, born May 2, 1961, died January 14, 2003, reunited with her daughter in eternity. Clara knelt and placed a bouquet of wild roses against Rachel's headstone. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said quietly, "but I wanted to say thank you for carrying me, for loving me, for searching for me even when everyone else stopped." She paused, her voice catching. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I promise I'll take care of him." Thomas stood a few feet away, giving her space. When she rose, he stepped forward and placed his own flowers, a single white lily, on the grave. "We found her, Rachel," he whispered. "She's home." The wind carried his words out over the bay, toward the lighthouse in the distance, toward the water that had kept its secret for so long. As they walked back to the parking lot, Clara slipped her hand into Thomas's. "Do you think she's at peace now?" she asked. Thomas looked back at the headstones, then at the bay beyond. "I think she is." They drove back to Anchorage in comfortable silence, the mountains rising on either side of the highway, the summer light stretching endlessly across the sky. Behind them, the lighthouse continued its vigil, the beam sweeping across the water in steady, unbroken rhythm. Some lights never go out, some stories never truly end, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, they get a second beginning. And that, against all odds, is enough.